I was standing on the porch of my grandfather's farmhouse in rural Tennessee when I first saw the construction crews breaking ground on what I thought was my land. The heavy machinery had already gouged deep scars into the fields where I used to run through corn stalks as a kid, and the noise was so loud I could barely hear myself think. My grandfather Thomas had passed away 6 months earlier, leaving me his 200-acre farm just outside Clarksville, and I had been driving up from Nashville every weekend to handle the estate details. This particular Saturday morning in late March, I discovered I apparently had unwelcome neighbors doing more than just neighborly things. I climbed into my truck and drove down the dirt path that separated the main farmhouse property from the eastern acres. The land rolled gently here, perfect for the soybean rotation my grandfather had planned before his heart finally gave out. Instead of tractors preparing soil, I found cement mixers, lumber stacks, and about 20 workers in hard hats moving with purpose. A large sign proclaimed, "Whispering Pines Community, 60 luxury rental units coming fall 2025. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. I had never authorized any construction. I had never sold any land. I had barely finished the probate process. A portly man in a yellow safety vest approached my truck as I parked near the construction trailer. His clipboard was thick with papers, and he had the confident stride of someone who believed he was exactly where he was supposed to be. "Can I help you?" he asked, not unkindly, but with the slight edge of someone prepared to escort a trespasser off the premises. "I own this land," I said, stepping out. "Thomas Caldwell. My grandfather was Thomas Caldwell Sr. He left me this entire farm, so I'm pretty curious why you were building on my property." The man's expression shifted from confident to confused. He flipped through papers on his clipboard. "This is the Whispering Pines development. We have all the proper permits issued by the Meadowbrook Heights HOA. They own this parcel." Meadowbrook Heights HOA? I had heard the name before. The subdivision had been built about 15 years ago on the western edge of my grandfather's farm. He had sold 40 acres to a developer back then, and those 40 acres became a gated community of cookie-cutter houses with strict rules about lawn ornaments and fence colors. But that was 40 acres, not this land. Yeah, the Homeowners Association purchased this section for community expansion. It was all done legally, I can assure you. I felt my jaw clench. "Show me the deed." The foreman looked uncomfortable now. "I do not have that. You would need to talk to the HOA board, but I have the building permits right here, issued proper and everything." I took a photo of the permit with my phone. The authorization signature belonged to someone named Patricia Whitmore, listed as HOA president. The property was described as Parcel 340B, Meadowbrook Heights Community Trust. "Stop construction immediately," I said. "I am telling you right now this is my land, and I never sold it to anyone." The foreman shook his head. "I cannot just stop work based on someone showing up and claiming ownership. I have contracts, permits, and a schedule. You need to sort this out with the HOA or the county." I wanted to argue, but he was right in a practical sense. I could not physically stop the construction without getting law enforcement involved, and I needed to understand what exactly was happening before I started that process. I took more photos of the construction site, the equipment, the sign, and the permit paperwork the foreman reluctantly let me photograph. Then I drove straight to the Montgomery County Clerk's office. The clerk was a tired-looking woman named Sheila, who had worked there for 30 years according to the nameplate on her desk. She pulled up the property records from my grandfather's farm and printed them out. As I reviewed the documents, my stomach sank. 3 months after my grandfather's death, while I was still navigating probate court, someone had filed a fraudulent deed transfer. The eastern 67 acres of the farm had been sold to the Meadowbrook Heights Community Trust for $1. The signature was supposedly my grandfather's, but I knew immediately it was forged. My grandfather had been in the hospital that entire month before he died, barely conscious, and certainly not conducting real estate transactions. "This is fraud," I said to Sheila. "My grandfather did not sign this. He was dying in a hospital bed when this was supposedly executed." She looked sympathetic, but helpless. "You will need to challenge it in court. File a complaint with the district attorney's office, too. But until a judge invalidates this deed, the HOA is the legal owner according to our records." I left the clerk's office with copies of everything and drove directly to the Meadowbrook Heights community. The neighborhood was exactly as I remembered from the few times I had driven past it. Identical two-story houses painted in approved shades of beige and gray, lawns maintained to putting green perfection, and a massive stone entrance with an actual guard shack. The guard was a young guy who looked bored out of his mind. "I need to speak with Patricia Whitmore," I told him. "Is she expecting you?" "No, but she's going to want to talk to me about the construction happening on my farmland." He made a call, spoke quietly into his phone, then nodded. "She will meet you at the community center. Follow this road to the end. You cannot miss it." The community center was a sprawling building that looked like it cost more than most of the houses. Inside, it had a gym, a pool visible through glass doors, a coffee bar, and a conference room where Patricia Whitmore was waiting. She was exactly what I expected from an HOA president. Mid-50s, blonde hair sprayed into submission, pantsuit that probably cost more than my truck payment, and an expression that suggested she had dealt with uppity residents before and found them tiresome. She stood when I entered, but did not offer to shake hands. "Mr. Caldwell, I assume?" she said. "I heard we had a misunderstanding at the construction site." "Not a misunderstanding. Fraud, grand theft, forgery, take your pick." I dropped the deed documents on the conference table. "My grandfather never sold you that land. He was dying in a hospital when this deed was supposedly signed, so I want to know exactly how you people think you are going to get away with stealing 67 acres from me." Patricia barely glanced at the papers. "The Meadowbrook Heights Community Trust purchased that land through proper legal channels. We have a valid deed on file with the county. If you have concerns about the transaction, you are welcome to pursue them through appropriate legal means. But the construction will continue. My grandfather's signature is forged on this document. That is a serious accusation. It is a serious crime." Patricia sat down and folded her hands on the table. Her nails were painted a shade of red that matched her lipstress exactly. "Mr. Caldwell, let me be frank with you. The Meadowbrook Heights community has been planning this expansion for 3 years. We have invested considerable resources into acquiring the necessary land, obtaining permits, and contracting with builders. Our residents have approved special assessments to fund this development. The rental income from these 60 units will substantially reduce HOA fees for everyone in our community. This project is happening. Not on my land, it is not. The land belongs to the community trust. You are welcome to hire a lawyer and challenge the deed. I am sure that will take, 2 years, maybe 3? By then, the units will be built, occupied, and generating revenue. Even if you somehow won your case, the remedies available to you would be financial compensation, not demolition of occupied housing. So I suggest you consider whether a protracted legal battle is really in your best interest." I stared at her, genuinely shocked by the brazenness. She was not even pretending the deed might be legitimate. She was openly telling me that they had stolen my land and were betting I could not stop them fast enough to matter. "You are remarkably confident for someone committing multiple felonies," I said. Patricia stood up. "I'm confident because I know how the system works. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a committee meeting. Please see yourself out." I left the community center feeling a cold rage settle into my bones. Patricia Whitmore had made a critical mistake. She had assumed I would be like other people she had steamrolled. She assumed I would either give up or get bogged down in the legal system until it was too late. She did not know I had spent 8 years as a paralegal before switching careers to agricultural management. She did not know I had connections throughout the Tennessee legal community from my time working at one of Nashville's largest firms. And she definitely did not know that I was single, childless, and had just inherited enough money from my grandfather's estate that I could dedicate myself full-time to making her life very difficult. I drove back to Nashville and spent the evening making calls. By Monday morning, I had retained Marcus Webb, one of the most aggressive property rights attorneys in the state. Marcus was in his 60s, had argued cases before the Tennessee Supreme Court, and had a particular hatred for HOA overreach after his own daughter had been fined into bankruptcy by a vindictive board. "This is one of the cleaner fraud cases I have seen," Marcus said after reviewing my documents. "The signature is obviously forged. Your grandfather was hospitalized. The sale price of $1 establishes no legitimate consideration. and the timing right after his death suggests they were monitoring the probate process to find a window of opportunity. "How long to get an injunction stopping construction?" I asked. Marcus grimaced. "That is the problem. Injunctions require proving irreparable harm. They will argue that stopping construction causes them irreparable financial harm. We can fight it, but it might take weeks or months to get a hearing. And Patricia is right about one thing. Once those buildings are up and people are living in them, demolition becomes much harder to obtain." So what do? We pursue multiple tracks simultaneously. First, we file a lawsuit seeking to void the deed and establish you as the rightful owner. Second, we file a criminal complaint with the district attorney for forgery and fraud. Third, we demand access to all HOA records regarding this transaction under Tennessee's nonprofit corporation laws. Someone at that HOA executed this fraud, and we need to find out who and gather evidence. Fourth, we hire a handwriting expert to formally document that the signature is forged. That all costs money. A lot of money, but you are sitting on 200 acres near a growing city. Even if they build on 67 of those acres, the remaining land is worth well over $2 million. This is worth fighting. I authorized Marcus to proceed with everything. The handwriting expert was a retired FBI analyst named Dr. Catherine Morse, who charged $5,000 for a preliminary analysis and would charge another $20,000 to testify if we went to trial. She confirmed within 3 days that the signature on the deed was not my grandfather's. The pressure, angle, and letter formation were all wrong. Moreover, she found evidence of digital manipulation in the document, suggesting someone had scanned a real signature from another document and inserted it electronically. The lawsuit was filed in Montgomery County Circuit Court on April 2nd. We sued Patricia Whitmore personally, the Meadowbrook Heights HOA, the Meadowbrook Heights Community Trust, and 3 other board members whose names appeared on various transaction documents. The complaint alleged fraud, forgery, unjust enrichment, and violation of Tennessee property laws. We asked for the deed to be voided, ownership restored to me, and punitive damages. The criminal complaint went to District Attorney Rebecca Sanchez's office. I met with an assistant DA named Kevin Foster, who seemed interested but cautious. "Property disputes usually get resolved in civil court," Kevin said. "We generally do not prosecute unless there is clear criminal intent." "They forged a deed to steal 67 acres of land worth over $1 million, I said. "How is that not clear criminal intent?" "I am not saying you are wrong. I am saying we need to investigate thoroughly before filing charges. The defense will argue it was a paperwork error, a misunderstanding, something that does not rise to criminal fraud. Give us time to gather evidence." The construction, meanwhile, continued at a rapid pace. Every weekend I drove up to the farm and watched the development take shape. Foundations were poured, framing went up. By mid-May, the structures actually looked like buildings. The development was designed as 15 4-unit apartment buildings, each 2 stories, with shared parking areas and a central clubhouse. The architecture was generic but competent. Vinyl siding, asphalt shingle roofs, energy-efficient windows. Everything was being done to code and with apparent quality. I photographed everything meticulously. I documented the progress, the contractors, the equipment. I also started talking to workers during their lunch breaks. Most were subcontractors who knew nothing about the property dispute, but a few had interesting information. "Yeah, the HOA lady is here every few days checking on things," one electrician told me. "Patricia, I think her name is. She is real particular about staying on schedule, keeps talking about how they need to start leasing by August." That timeline made sense. If they could get tenants moved in before the legal case was resolved, it would create exactly the complication Patricia had described. Occupied housing is much harder to demolish than empty buildings. Marcus filed for a preliminary injunction in early May. The hearing was scheduled for June 4th, exactly 2 months after we filed the lawsuit. In the meantime, the HOA filed their response to our complaint. Their answer was breathtaking in its dishonesty. They claimed the deed was legitimate, that they had purchased the land from my grandfather in good faith, and that I was now trying to renege on a valid transaction. They provided no evidence for any of this, but they did not need to yet. They just needed to create enough doubt to keep the legal process grinding forward slowly. I started spending more time at the farm. I moved into the old farmhouse full-time in late May, taking a leave of absence from my job at an agricultural consulting firm in Nashville. My boss was understanding. He knew what I was dealing with. The farmhouse needed work anyway, and being on site let me monitor the construction constantly. That is when I met Vanessa Hayes. She knocked on my farmhouse door on a Tuesday evening in early June. She was in her early 30s, dressed in jeans and a faded University of Tennessee sweatshirt, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She looked tired and worried. "Are you Thomas Caldwell?" she asked. "I am. I live in Meadowbrook Heights. I heard you were suing the HOA about the construction next door." "That is right. Can I talk to you, please? I think I might have information that could help." I invited her in and made coffee. Vanessa sat at the kitchen table and looked around at the old farmhouse with something like nostalgia. "My grandparents had a place like this," she said. "Before they sold it to a developer, I always loved visiting here." She wrapped her hands around the coffee mug. "I bought a house in Meadowbrook Heights 3 years ago. Biggest mistake of my life. The HOA is insane. They fine people for everything. My neighbor got fined $500 because her mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Someone else got fined because their kid's bike was visible from the street. It is like living in a prison where the guards are your neighbors." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because 6 months ago, there was a special HOA meeting about the expansion project. They wanted to approve a $10,000 special assessment on every homeowner to fund the construction. A lot of people objected because we were not told where the money was going or how the land was acquired. Patricia shut down all the questions. She said the board had handled everything and we just needed to trust them." "Did anyone question the land purchase specifically?" Vanessa nodded. "A guy named Richard Chen. He's an attorney, lives 2 streets over from me. He asked to see the deed and the purchase agreement. Patricia refused. She said it was confidential board business. Richard argued that homeowners had a right to review financial documents. Patricia had him removed from the meeting by security." "Is Richard willing to talk to me?" "I think so. He's been trying to organize homeowners to vote out the board. But Patricia controls the proxy votes. She gets people to sign them without understanding what they are signing, then votes them however she wants." This was valuable information. Marcus had already subpoenaed HOA records, but having insider witnesses would be crucial. I got Richard Chen's contact information from Vanessa and called him that night. Richard was angry and eager to help. "That woman is running the HOA like her personal fiefdom," he told me. "I've reviewed the bylaws in the Tennessee Homeowners Association Act. What she is doing is illegal on multiple levels. The problem is getting enough homeowners to care. Most people just pay the fines and assessments because fighting the HOA is exhausting." "Can you testify about the meeting where you asked to see the deed?" "Absolutely. I have notes from that meeting. I documented everything because I knew something was wrong." The preliminary injunction hearing arrived on June 4th. Marcus and I sat at the plaintiff's table in the Montgomery County Courthouse while the HOA's attorney, a slick guy named Brandon Matthews from a Memphis firm, sat across from us looking supremely confident. Judge Harold Winters was a no-nonsense jurist in his late 60s who had a reputation for disliking frivolous lawsuits, but also disliking corporate malfeasance. He reviewed our filings with careful attention. "Mr. Webb, you are asking me to halt construction on a multi-million-dollar development project based on allegations of forgery," Judge Winters said. "That is a significant order. What evidence do you have?" Marcus presented Dr. Morse's handwriting analysis, my grandfather's hospital records proving he was incapacitated when the deed was supposedly signed, and the suspicious timing of the transaction. It was compelling evidence. Brandon Matthews countered with procedural arguments. "Your Honor, this is a property dispute that should proceed through normal civil litigation. Halting construction at this stage would cause the HOA substantial financial harm. The contractors have deadlines, the financing is time-sensitive, and the homeowners are depending on this project to reduce their fees. If Mr. Caldwell ultimately prevails, he can be compensated financially. But stopping construction now is premature." "The construction is happening on my land with my stolen resources," I said before Judge Winters could respond. Every day they continue building is additional trespass and conversion of my property. Judge Winters thought for a long moment. I am going to split the baby here. Mr. Matthews, your client's deed is highly suspicious. The handwriting analysis alone raises serious questions. However, Mr. Webb, you are right that an injunction is a drastic remedy. I am going to order an expedited trial schedule. We will have a full trial on the merits in 90 days. In the meantime, construction may continue, but the HOA will be required to post a bond equal to the full assessed value of the disputed land. That way, if Mr. Caldwell prevails, he can collect immediately without chasing assets. It was not the outcome I wanted, but it was not a total loss either. The bond requirement would cost the HOA at least $1.2 million, which would strain their finances significantly. And 90 days was lightning fast for a civil trial. Outside the courthouse, Marcus was cautiously optimistic. Winters is telling them he thinks we are right, but he wants a full record before issuing a major ruling. The bond requirement is huge. They will have to deplete reserves or take out loans to post it. What if they just keep building and do not post the bond? Then we go back to court and get the injunction automatically. Winters is giving them a chance to make this right. If they ignore his order, he will hammer them. The HOA did post the bond, but I learned from Vanessa that it required an emergency special assessment of another $5,000 per homeowner. The neighborhood was in revolt. People who had been passively accepting Patricia's leadership were now demanding answers about where their money was going. A petition started circulating to call a special election for the board. Under Tennessee law, 15% of homeowners could force a special election. The petition got the required signatures in 10 days. Patricia tried to block the election with procedural challenges, but Richard Chen knew the law too well. He filed a complaint with the Tennessee Real Estate Commission, which regulated HOAs, and threatened a lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty. The election was scheduled for July 15th. Meanwhile, the construction entered its final phases. Roofing was completed. Interior work began. Appliances were delivered. By late June, the buildings were essentially finished. The HOA started advertising the units for rent: 2-bedroom apartments for $1,200 a month, 3-bedroom units for $1,500. In the Clarksville market, those were reasonable prices, and applications started coming in immediately. This is where I made my strategic decision. Marcus wanted to fight the leasing process, to argue that the HOA could not legally rent property they did not rightfully own. But I saw a different approach. Every lease they signed was additional evidence of their fraud. Every tenant who moved in was another person who would be disrupted when I won my case. And most importantly, every dollar of rent they collected was a dollar I could claim as damages. Let them fill every unit, I told Marcus. Let them commit fully to this fraud. The bigger they make it, the harder they fall. Marcus was skeptical, but trusted my instincts. You are gambling that we win the trial. If we lose, you are letting them entrench themselves even deeper. We are going to win. The evidence is overwhelming, and when we do, I want maximum leverage. The special election happened on July 15th. Vanessa, Richard, and a coalition of fed-up homeowners ran a slate of reform candidates against Patricia and her allies. The campaign was vicious. Patricia sent out mailings claiming the reformers would bankrupt the HOA and destroy property values. The reformers countered with detailed accounting of Patricia's spending and the ongoing lawsuit. Patricia lost decisively. She was voted out along with 2 other board members. Richard Chen was elected president, Vanessa became treasurer, and 3 other reformers filled out the board. I met with the new board on July 20th at the community center. The atmosphere was completely different from my first visit. Richard and Vanessa were professional, but clearly allies. We have spent the last week reviewing every document Patricia left behind, Richard said, and it is worse than we thought. The land purchase from your grandfather was not just fraudulent in execution. There was no board vote authorizing it. Patricia did this entirely on her own authority. She forged the deed herself or hired someone to do it. She then presented it to the board as a done deal and pressured them to approve the construction funding after the fact. Do you have proof of this? Marcus asked. Vanessa slid a thick folder across the table. Board meeting minutes, emails, financial records. Patricia was very careless about documentation. because she never thought anyone would challenge her. We found an email where she discusses acquiring the Caldwell land before your grandfather even died. She was planning this while he was still alive. This was explosive evidence. It proved premeditation and transformed the case from possible mistake to deliberate fraud. We want to settle this, Richard said. The new board did not commit these crimes. We do not want to continue defending Patricia's fraud. We are prepared to surrender any claim to your land and cooperate fully with the criminal investigation. What about the buildings? I asked. Richard looked pained. That is the problem. We have spent $3.8 million on construction. The money came from special assessments and a loan secured by HOA assets. If we tear down the buildings, the homeowners are ruined financially. Most people cannot afford another $10,000 or $20,000 in assessments. Some are already facing foreclosure from the previous assessments. So you want me to just accept that 60 apartment buildings are now sitting on my land? We want to negotiate a solution that does not destroy 300 families, Vanessa said quietly. We were victims of Patricia's fraud too. We did not know the land was stolen. We just paid what we were told to pay. I looked at Marcus. He shrugged slightly, leaving the decision to me. Here is my proposal, I said. The HOA formally surrenders all claims to the land. You cooperate fully with both the civil lawsuit and criminal prosecution of Patricia. You provide all documents and testimony needed. In exchange, I will not seek demolition of the buildings. Instead, I will take ownership of them, and the HOA will pay me fair market rent for the land they occupy. That rent gets deducted from what you owe me in damages. We work out a payment plan that does not bankrupt the homeowners, but compensates me fairly over time. Richard and Vanessa looked at each other. How much rent? Richard asked. Marcus did some quick math on his legal pad. 67 acres at agricultural land values is roughly $8,000 per acre, so about $536,000 in land value. Rental property of that scale typically returns 5 to 7% annually, so somewhere between $25,000 and $35,000 per year for the land lease. We can work with that, Richard said, especially if we can make payments over 10 or 15 years. We shook hands. The new HOA board formally withdrew their defense of the lawsuit and filed a confession of judgment acknowledging that the deed was fraudulent and that I was the rightful owner. They also turned over all evidence against Patricia to the district attorney's office. The units, meanwhile, were being leased rapidly. By August 1st, 43 of the 60 units had signed tenants. By September 1st, all 60 units were occupied. The HOA was collecting $78,000 per month in rent, which was helping stabilize their finances. The criminal case against Patricia Whitmore moved forward in parallel. DA Rebecca Sanchez assigned Kevin Foster to prosecute once the new evidence came in from the HOA board. Kevin called me in early August. We are filing charges, he said, forgery, theft over $250,000, and fraud. The forgery and theft charges are both Class B felonies carrying 8 to 30 years in prison. With the evidence the HOA turned over, this is an extremely strong case. Patricia was arrested on August 19th at her home in Meadowbrook Heights. The arrest was quiet and professional, but word spread through the neighborhood instantly. Vanessa texted me a photo of Patricia being led to a police car in handcuffs, her face pale and shocked. The preliminary hearing happened in early September. Patricia's attorney tried to argue that this was a civil dispute, not a criminal matter, but Judge Alice Morrison disagreed. The defendant allegedly forged a deed to steal over $1 million in property, Judge Morrison said. That is textbook criminal fraud. Bail is set at $500,000. Trial is scheduled for November. Patricia posted bail but was clearly broken. Her husband, a quiet accountant who apparently had no knowledge of what she had done, filed for divorce within a week. She was expelled from every social organization she belonged to. The neighborhood she had once ruled was now hostile territory. The civil trial became unnecessary given the HOA's confession of judgment, but we still had to go before Judge Winters to formalize the settlement. That hearing happened on September 23rd. Judge Winters reviewed the agreement carefully. Mr. Caldwell, you are being quite generous given the circumstances. You could have demanded demolition and full damages. The homeowners were victims too, I said. They did not know the land was stolen. I want to be compensated fairly, but I do not want to ruin innocent people. That is a mature and thoughtful approach. Judge Winters signed the order restoring full ownership of the land to me, establishing the lease agreement with the HOA, and setting a payment schedule for the remaining damages. The HOA would pay me $400,000 over 10 years in addition to the annual land lease. Combined with the rent from the apartment units, which now belong to me, I would actually make substantial income from the entire debacle. Patricia's criminal trial began on November 8th. I attended every day of the 2-week proceeding. The prosecution's case was overwhelming. Dr. Morse testified about the forged signature. Richard Chen testified about Patricia's secretive behavior and refusal to share documents. The former board members testified that Patricia had acted without authorization. Computer forensics experts showed how Patricia had digitally manipulated the deed using her home computer. The defense tried to argue that Patricia had believed she was acting in the HOA's best interest and had not intended to commit a crime. The jury did not buy it. After 3 hours of deliberation, they returned guilty verdicts on all counts. Sentencing happened 2 weeks later. Patricia stood before Judge Morrison, no longer the confident HOA president, but a woman facing serious prison time. "Mrs. Whitmore, you held a position of trust within your community," Judge Morrison said. "You were responsible for managing resources on behalf of your neighbors. Instead, you abused that trust to commit serious felonies. You forged documents, stole property, and attempted to enrich your community at another person's expense. The only thing that prevented this from being a complete disaster was the vigilance of the victim and the courage of homeowners who stood up to you." Patricia was sentenced to 12 years in prison with the possibility of parole after serving 8 years. She was also ordered to pay restitution of $100,000 to me personally, separate from the HOA's obligations. She broke down crying as she was led away, but I felt no sympathy. She had gambled that she could steal my land and get away with it through legal delays and fait accompli. She had lost that gamble completely. The aftermath took months to fully resolve. I officially took ownership of the 60 apartment units in December, once all the legal paperwork was finalized. I hired a property management company to handle the day-to-day operations, collecting rent and managing maintenance. The units were actually quite nice, and the tenants were good people. I kept all the existing leases and maintained the same rent levels. The farm itself required attention too. I still had over 130 acres of undeveloped land. I decided to continue my grandfather's agricultural plans, leasing most of the acreage to local farmers for crop rotation. I kept the farmhouse and about 10 acres around it for myself, renovating the old building into a comfortable year-round home. Vanessa and Richard became genuine friends. The new HOA board operated transparently and fairly, and Meadowbrook Heights slowly recovered from Patricia's reign. Property values stabilized, families stopped living in fear of arbitrary fines. The special assessments ended once the construction loan was paid off. I ran into one of Patricia's former allies, a woman named Donna who had served on the board during the fraud, at a grocery store in Clarksville in January. She looked embarrassed when she saw me. "I want you to know I did not realize what Patricia was doing," Donna said. "She told us the land purchase was legitimate. I should have asked more questions, but I trusted her." "A lot of people trusted her," I said. "That is what made her dangerous." "Are you going to stay here or sell now that you own the apartments?" "I am staying. This was my grandfather's land. He wanted me to have it and take care of it. That is what I'm going to do." The rental income from the apartments provided a steady revenue stream that supplemented my consulting work. I was able to work remotely from the farmhouse, traveling to Nashville only occasionally for meetings. The land that Patricia had tried to steal now supported me financially while staying in my family. One evening in March, exactly 1 year after I first discovered the construction, I sat on the farmhouse porch and looked out at the apartment buildings in the distance. Lights glowed in the windows. Families were cooking dinner, kids were doing homework, people were living their lives. The buildings that had been built through fraud were now providing homes for 60 families and income for me. It was not the outcome I had expected when I first saw those construction crews tearing up the fields, but it was a good outcome. Patricia was in prison. The homeowners had reclaimed their HOA. The tenants had nice places to live, and I had my grandfather's land, plus a profitable rental business. My phone rang. It was Marcus Webb. "I wanted to give you an update," Marcus said. "Patricia filed an appeal of her conviction. It was denied. She is officially going to serve her full sentence." "Good. You should be proud of how you handled this, Thomas. A lot of people would have just rolled over or gotten lost in the legal system. You fought smart and won completely." "I had good help. You, Richard, Vanessa, everyone who stood up to Patricia. Still, it takes courage to fight power. Patricia counted on you being intimidated. She was wrong." After we hung up, I stayed on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. The fields were being prepared for spring planting. The apartment buildings hummed with life. The farmhouse was warm and solid behind me. My grandfather had left me this land because he knew I would protect it. He had taught me that land is not just property. It is legacy and responsibility. Patricia Whitmore had tried to steal that legacy, believing she could get away with it through arrogance and legal manipulation. She learned differently. The HOA might have built 60 rental units on my inherited farmland. I might have let them fill every lease before I sued. But in the end, justice worked exactly as it should. The criminal went to prison. The victims were protected, and the land stayed with the family who loved it. I went inside to make dinner, content with how everything had resolved. Tomorrow, I would meet with the property managers to discuss some maintenance issues in Building 7. Next week, I had a consultation with a farmer interested in leasing 50 acres for organic vegetables. The month after that, my first quarterly rental income payment would arrive. Life was good, the land was safe, and somewhere in a Tennessee prison, Patricia Whitmore was learning that crime does not pay, no matter how clever you think you are. The farm stretched out under the stars, exactly as my grandfather had left it to me. Not diminished by theft, but enhanced by justice. Not lost to fraud, but secured through determination, and that made all the fighting worthwhile. Every document filed, every hearing attended, every strategic decision made had led to this moment, standing in my grandfather's farmhouse on my grandfather's land, with a future as solid as the earth beneath my feet. Patricia had built her 60 rental units on what she thought was stolen land. Instead, she had accidentally built my investment portfolio on property I already owned. Her crime became my opportunity. Her fraud became my fortune. Her arrogance became her prison sentence. I learned something important through this whole ordeal. Sometimes the best revenge is not fighting fire with fire, but letting your enemy dig their own grave while you document everything for the jury. Patricia could have stolen 100 acres, and I might never have noticed in time. But by building permanent structures and leasing them to tenants, she created undeniable evidence of her crime. She made it impossible for any judge or jury to dismiss what she had done as a mere paperwork error. She had been so confident in her scheme, so certain that legal delays would protect her, that she never considered the possibility of facing real consequences. That overconfidence destroyed her. The Tennessee night was quiet except for crickets and the distant sound of traffic on Highway 41A. I locked up the farmhouse and headed to bed, satisfied with a long fight finally concluded. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new responsibilities. But tonight, I could rest knowing that my grandfather's legacy was secure, that justice had prevailed, and that sometimes, when you are patient and strategic, the bad guys really do lose in the end. Patricia Whitmore had taught me that lesson better than anyone. She had shown me that fraud might succeed in the short term, but truth and persistence win in the long term. She had demonstrated that stealing is easy, but keeping stolen property is impossible when someone refuses to give up. I fell asleep in my grandfather's house on my grandfather's land, with my grandfather's legacy intact and growing. And when I dreamed of spring planting and summer harvests, and the good, honest work of stewarding land that had been in my family for 3 generations and would remain there for generations to come. The HOA had built 60 rental units on my inherited farmland. I had let them fill every lease, then sued and won. The criminal was in prison, the community was healed, the land was mine. And life, as they say, was very good indeed.